Kellen raised his wine glass like he was giving a toast. "We voted," he said, his voice smooth and easy, as if the words weren't about to cut through flesh and bone. "You're not family anymore." There was a beat of silence. Then laughter. Not nervous laughter, the real kind. Melise let out a sharp exhale, hiding her smile behind the rim of her glass. Calton, her younger brother, who always hovered around like a forgotten extra, clapped twice like it was a line from a sitcom. No one looked at me. Not even Evie. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't give them the performance they were hoping for. Instead, I reached slowly into my bag and pulled out the folder. Manila, thick, tied with a small elastic. I laid it down in the center of the table. It landed with a gentle but unmistakable thud. Kellen's eyes dropped to it, confused. His smirk flickered. "What's this?" Melise asked, already leaning in. "If I'm not family anymore," I said, my voice even then, "you won't need this." Her fingers hesitated over the flap. The room held its breath. No one moved. Then she opened it. The smile slid off her face like water from glass. Kellen looked over her shoulder. He froze. It started with the spreadsheet, organized, clean, undeniable. Dates, amounts, recipients, a red total at the bottom. Calton stopped mid-chew. I waited. I waited while they realized that I had never forgotten, that I had never been as naive as they assumed. They wanted to make this a show, so I gave them one, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for inclusion. I didn't say, "Please don't do this to me." Those words had left me years ago, buried in 1,000 moments no one cared to remember. No one spoke now. Just the clink of a fork falling from a hand. Just the sound of a lie cracking open. I glanced across the table to Evie. She was still staring at the papers in front of her parents, eyes wide. She was too young to understand the numbers, but not the betrayal. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at my son. Kellen didn't meet my eyes. He was busy reading page 2. The text message. The one he hadn't seen yet. He looked paler with every second. I noticed it first when the group chat disappeared. The thread that used to ping every few days, dinner photos, appointment reminders, school plays, was just gone. I checked again. Nothing. Later I asked Evie if they'd changed the name. She whispered, "It's called Vexlin Family now." My name wasn't in it. I didn't say anything. I didn't text Kellen. I didn't ask why. 2 days later, Melise called. Her voice was syrupy, sweet. "Oh, Merelda, just wanted to let you know we're doing a small Thanksgiving this year, really low-key. Just a private thing. You know how crazy it gets." She didn't invite me. She didn't need to. The implication was clear. I thanked her. Politely. Told her to enjoy the day. Then hung up and stared at the kitchen wall for a long time. I could still smell cinnamon in the air from the pie I'd just pulled out of the oven. It had been Evie's favorite since she was 5. That evening, while I was wrapping up stuffing in foil, the phone rang again. Grandma Evie whispered, "Are you coming Thursday?" "I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to," I said softly. She hesitated. "Mom said it was just us, but I want you here." I closed my eyes. Just for a moment. Then I told her I'll be there. I woke up early Thanksgiving morning. Roasted the squash. Baked the cornbread. Packed everything in the old cooler I used for holidays. I even folded napkins the way Evie liked, like little crowns. I dressed in my soft gray sweater and wore the pearl studs Kellen had given me for my 60th. The ones Melise always said were a little too classic. I drove to their house, my hands steady on the wheel, though my chest felt tight. When I arrived, Calton opened the door. His face flickered surprise, then confusion, then a tight, awkward smile. "Merelda," he said, "didn't know you were coming." "I know," I replied. Evie asked. Melise's heels clicked down the hall. "Oh, you're here." Her mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Well, we weren't expecting extra guests, but I held up the foil-covered dish. I brought stuffing. I walked straight to the kitchen, set it down, and didn't ask where to sit. No one offered. When dinner began, they placed me at the end of the table near the coat closet. I still passed the gravy, still refilled glasses, still cut the turkey when Kellen struggled with the knife. Evie gave me a small smile and leaned her head on my shoulder after dessert. They had tried to lock me out, but I showed up anyway. Because love does that. Even when it's bruised, even when it's told it doesn't belong, it still arrives. Quietly, fully, with stuffing and napkins and pearl earrings no one compliments. I was clearing plates when Melise made her toast. She tapped her glass and said, "To family, the ones who really show up." Kellen chuckled. I placed the plate down gently and walked back to the kitchen. The folder was already in my purse, resting under my scarf. Not a threat, not a weapon, just the truth printed and stapled, sealed in a manila skin. I hadn't planned to use it, not unless they pushed me. But then Kellen stood up, wine glass in hand, voice raised, tone smug. "We voted," he said. "You're not family anymore." And suddenly, I knew exactly what to do. My seat had a draft and a view of the backyard's dead hydrangeas. Calton was next to me, busy talking over me about football and politics, loud enough that I couldn't hear myself think. But not once did he turn to include me. Kellen didn't look at me when I walked in. He didn't look at me when I set the dishes down, or when I poured water into glasses I had to fetch myself from the cabinet. Melise gave me a glance, then turned away just as quickly, preoccupied with aligning the napkins she hadn't folded. Evie slipped into her seat quietly and gave me the smallest nod. It meant more than anything anyone else said that day. When the turkey came out, they passed the carving knife to Kellen, but his cuts were jagged, uneven. He muttered something about the blade. I stood up, took the knife gently from his hand, and finished the job. Years of muscle memory guiding every slice. No one thanked me. I served Calton, then Melise, then Kellen. They accepted the plates like they were owed. I waited for someone to notice. No one did. When Melise asked where the cranberry sauce was, I got up without a word and retrieved the jar she'd forgotten to open. I spooned it into the nice bowl, the one I'd given them years ago as a housewarming gift, the one she now claimed as an estate find. I brought out the cornbread warm in the center and set it down next to the green beans. I didn't eat right away. I kept checking on the rolls in the oven. They weren't mine, but I didn't want them to burn. Being useful had always been my role. Quiet, competent, dependable. It used to mean something. Now it felt like I was just the hands, not the heart. Melise cleared her throat and said, "Mom always did love the holidays." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at Kellen. He nodded absently, sipping his wine, his eyes still avoiding mine. I ate in silence, chewing slowly, not tasting much. The chair creaked under me every time I shifted, reminding me of where they'd put me. After dessert, I gathered the empty plates. No one asked. It was just expected. I stacked them carefully and carried them to the sink. I ran warm water over the dishes and scrubbed without a word. My fingers knew this routine too well. I didn't need to think. I didn't need to feel. That's what they wanted, I realized. A version of me that didn't take up space. Just filled needs. I finished the last dish and dried my hands on a towel. I returned to the dining room just in time to hear Melise laughing at something Calton said. Kellen was grinning. The chair by the door was still empty. Evie caught my eye. Her mouth tightened. Then she looked down at her lap. I walked back to my place and sat quietly, folding my hands together. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't mention the fact that I had brought half the meal. They didn't see me, but they would, because the folder was still tucked inside my purse, and the moment would come. I had stepped into the hallway to grab more napkins from the linen drawer. They always ran short, and no one else ever thought ahead. It was muscle memory for me. Check the bread. Check the napkins, refill the water. They never noticed it happening, just that things were done. As I unfolded the drawer, I heard Melissa's voice drifting in from the kitchen. She drags the mood down, she said. A pause. Then Kellen's voice lower, but unmistakable. She drains us. I didn't move. My fingers clenched around the napkins, creasing the edges. They weren't whispering. They weren't even trying to be discreet. That's how far I'd slipped in their minds, quiet enough to forget, familiar enough to ignore. She's always hovering, Melise continued. It's like she makes everything feel heavy. She just doesn't know when to stop, Kellen murmured. It's always guilt with her. Every visit turns into a reminder of how much we owe. Melise scoffed. Exactly. Like we didn't build our lives ourselves. The linen in my hands crinkled under the pressure. I blinked once, then twice, forcing my jaw to stay where it was. I folded the napkins neatly, corners, aligned soft cotton, pressed flat, while something inside me crumpled in silence. I stepped back into the dining room as if I hadn't heard a thing. Calton was still sipping brandy. Evie had her chin in her hands, staring out the window. Melise walked in. Moments later, her voice bright again. Oh, you found more. Thank you, Merelda. Not Mom, not even Ma, just my name. Sharp and deliberate. I nodded, placing the folded napkins by each plate. I wondered how many times I had done this exact motion, how many holidays, how many Sunday dinners, how many quiet visits where my usefulness was a stand-in for love. Melise sat beside Kellen and whispered something. He chuckled, but didn't look up. I returned to my seat by the patio door. My hands were still, but my mind wasn't. For a long time I thought love meant giving until it hurt. Until you were hollow. Until your presence became a burden no one asked for. But something shifted when I stood in that hallway and heard their words. It wasn't pain that settled in me, it was clarity. I no longer needed to guess where I stood. The folder was still at my feet, and suddenly I knew I wasn't afraid to use it. I reached down and slid it onto my lap, just as Kellen stood and lifted his wine glass. Kellen stood just as I laid the last napkin back on my plate. The room quieted. Even Calton, who had been droning on about supply chains and something he saw on cable news, stopped talking. Kellen raised his wine glass and cleared his throat like he was about to give a wedding toast. His eyes scanned the table carefully, avoiding mine. We've voted, he said, and we've decided. You're not family anymore. Melise clapped sharp and deliberate, like she had been waiting for her cue. Calton grinned and lifted his glass. Well, it was overdue, he said under his breath, but not low enough. I didn't react. Evie, on the other hand, stared at her father like she didn't understand the language he was speaking. Her fork slipped from her fingers and clattered against the plate. She looked at me, her eyes already filling. Melise turned toward her. Sweetheart, don't be upset. This is just something the grown-ups needed to do. Kellen chuckled. It's not personal, Mom. It's just, we need space. It's time we set some boundaries. Boundaries. That word again. Melise loved using it when it benefited her, when it meant she didn't have to answer texts or explain cold shoulders or rude comments in front of guests. It's not that we don't care, Kellen added, but you've been difficult. You make things heavier than they need to be. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I let out a soft, quiet breath. Then I reached for the folder and placed it gently on the center of the table. If I'm not family anymore, I said, then you won't need this. It landed in front of Melise, who blinked. What is this? Something I put together, just in case. Kellen looked annoyed. Is this necessary? Apparently so. Melise opened the folder. The sound of paper shifting filled the room. She saw the first page and froze. Evie's eyes darted between us, panic blooming on her small face. Calton leaned forward to get a better look, but Melise slammed the folder shut. "What is this supposed to prove?" she said, voice tight. "Everything," I replied, my voice level. Kellen reached across, pulled the folder toward him, and opened it again. His brow furrowed. His mouth tightened. He flipped to the next page, and then the next. I didn't say a word, because the pages were already speaking for me. Kellen's fingers hovered over the folder like it might bite. He glanced at me, then back to the manila cover. His jaw tightening with that familiar performative restraint he always used when something challenged his version of control. I didn't move. My hands stayed folded in my lap. My posture was steady, calm. I had imagined this moment 100 ways over the last few months, but not once had I pictured it being this quiet. Melise reached over him. She pulled the folder open with too much flair, like she expected it to be empty, like it was just one of my dramatic guilt trips. But then she saw the first page. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. It was a spreadsheet, dates, transactions, names, color-coded, labeled, neat and thorough, just like I had kept everything else in their lives. It started with a dental payment from 12 years ago, Melise's emergency surgery. Kellen hadn't had a credit card high enough to cover it then, so I did. Then came the car down payment, the loan I co-signed, the check for their first house deposit, the one they swore they'd pay back the moment bonuses hit. They never hit. Page after page, the numbers climbed. $1,000 for Kelton's career switch seminar, $500 for Melise's boutique launch, $400 here, $600 there, and then the red total at the bottom of the sheet, $86,740. Kellen took the folder from her hands. He turned a few more pages. I watched his face change, not from confusion, but from recognition. He remembered. He just hadn't expected me to. Evie sat still, staring at the two of them, then looking at me. Her small hands were clenched around the edge of her chair. She said nothing, but her eyes moved between us, trying to decode the shift in air. Kellen landed on the page with the text message, the one Melise had sent by mistake, thinking she was texting someone else. Just have to sweet-talk her a little. The spineless cash cow will pay up. Kellen's lips parted. He glanced toward Melise. She looked down. For once, she didn't have something snide to say. I stayed seated, still even. "This is petty," Melise muttered. "You really sat down and made this what to humiliate us on a holiday?" "No," I said, "to remember." Kellen closed the folder and set it down slowly. His hands were trembling just slightly, but enough that I noticed. "Why now?" he asked. My voice stayed quiet. "Because I needed to know that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the years, the money, the silence." He didn't answer. I looked at Calton, who was trying to slide his chair back without drawing attention. His face had gone completely blank. Then I turned my gaze back to my son. "You voted," I said. So I brought the receipts, and then I reached forward and flipped to the very last page. I watched Kellen flip to the last page, then sit back in his chair like the air had been knocked out of him. The red number at the bottom didn't need explanation. $131,000. There it was. 2 decades boiled down to columns and decimals. A ledger of love disguised as obligation. My life savings divided among their wants, their emergencies, their forgotten promises. Melise's face twisted. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You make it sound like we took advantage?" "You did," I said. Repeatedly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The folder spoke louder than I ever had. Every transfer, every check, every receipt was there. Photocopies of tuition deposits, wire confirmations, email threads with subject lines like, "Need help again?" and just until next month. I hadn't missed a single one. College, I said softly, tapping one page. That's your tuition to Northwestern. I cashed in my annuity to cover the gap. You never asked where the money came from. You just assumed it would be there. Kellen stayed silent. This one here, I pointed again. That's when you needed help with the second mortgage. Remember, Melise had just quit her job to start her business. You were drowning in interest payments. I drained my CD early, lost 2 years of interest. But I told you it was a gift. Because I thought that's what mothers did. Melise's arms crossed tightly. Why are you throwing this in our faces now? Because you decided I wasn't family, I said. And if I'm not family, then this... It's just accounting. Evie looked like she was holding her breath. Calton finally leaned forward. Look, no one's denying you helped us out, but maybe we just thought... No, I cut in. You didn't think. That's the point. None of you ever thought I'd remember. None of you thought I'd write it down. They all stared at the folder now like it was toxic. But I wasn't finished. Page 16, I said. Kellen, that's the business bailout. $40,000. You were 1/4 away from losing the agency. I pulled from my retirement. You said, I'll make it up to you, I swear. You never did. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look at the page. I let the silence stretch. I wasn't here to shame them. I wasn't even angry anymore. But I wasn't going to let them pretend. You wanted to vote me out, I said quietly. Fine, but make sure you know who you're voting out. Melise opened her mouth again, but I held up a hand. There's one more thing, I said. Last page. Bottom right. Kellen reached it and stopped. His brows pulled together as he read it. Then he read it again. I watched the moment the recognition dawned. His face went pale, because that wasn't just another receipt. It was a hotel statement. And under additional guests, it listed a name he'd hoped would never come to light. 2 months ago, I had just finished loading the dishwasher when my phone buzzed. It was late, almost midnight. I almost didn't check it. But habit is a hard thing to break. A message from Melise. No greeting, no preamble. Just smile, she's a spineless wallet. For a second I stared at it thinking, maybe I'd misunderstood. Then it disappeared. Gone. Recalled. Unsent. But not before I took a screenshot. My hands were shaking when I did it. But I got it. I didn't say anything then. I didn't respond. I didn't call. I sat down at the kitchen table, still damp from wiping, and stared at those words she thought I wouldn't see, or at least wouldn't keep. Spineless wallet. That was who I was to them. Not a mother, not a person, an account number, a fallback plan. I opened a drawer and pulled out the old shoebox where I kept bank papers. I took out the first statement I saw and placed the screenshot on top. Then I started printing. Old emails. Transfer confirmations. Voicemails I'd transcribed. I didn't know what I was building yet, but I knew why. Not for revenge, for clarity. I needed to see it all in one place. Needed to know it wasn't just in my head. The more I looked, the more there was. Every thank you followed by another ask. Every gift that turned into an expectation. Every conversation that had sounded loving, but ended in my wallet opening. And through it all, I remembered how small I'd made myself, smiling when they forgot birthdays, laughing off how they left me off group vacations, brushing off the sting of never being asked what I needed, because I had believed that love meant letting them take without asking. But that message shattered something. It didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because it was true. That was how they saw me. And once I saw that I couldn't unsee it. So when Kellen flipped to the page with the screenshot at the table, I didn't look away. He stared at the image for a long time. Melise's name at the top, the words clear and sharp, the timestamp, the follow-up. Sorry, wrong person. He looked up at her. You told me she was lying, he said. Melise swallowed. It was a joke. His face darkened. A joke. Calton leaned back quiet for once. Evie covered her mouth, eyes wide and wet. Melise's lip curled. She's been waiting to use this, sitting on it like a trap. What kind of person does that? The kind who's tired of being erased, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to, because finally, they were listening. And there was still one more page to go. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sat across from a woman named Corinne Bayless in a small downtown office with peeling paint and steady silence. She didn't offer pity. She offered paper. I don't want a lawsuit, I told her. I'm not trying to ruin them. Corinne gave me a look one I've seen from nurses and clerks and tax preparers my whole life. The kind that says, you've already been ruined. Now you're just cleaning up the mess. Then let's keep it clean, she said. You want distance protection and clarity. I nodded. Good. That starts here. She handed me a form revoking power of attorney, something I had signed years ago when Kellen was fresh out of college and insisted it would only be for emergencies. I signed. Then came the healthcare proxy, the one that listed Melise as my emergency contact. She never picks up her phone, I said quietly. Corinne simply slid a new page across. You decide now who does. I left it blank. Let the hospital call no one, I thought. It would be quieter that way. Corinne moved through everything with precision, removing me from shared accounts, terminating the small automatic transfers I'd set up for Kellen's business insurance. When she asked about the trust for Evie, I hesitated. She's the only one I still love without question, I whispered. Corinne waited. But love shouldn't be blind, I continued. It should have structure. Boundaries. She gave a slow nod. Then we freeze it. I had established that trust for Evie's college fund years ago. Kellen and Melise were listed as co-signers on withdrawals. I assumed they'd never touch it unless needed. I assumed wrong. I want her to have it, I said. But not until she's 18. Not unless I say so. Corinne adjusted the paperwork. Done. We finished in silence. At the end, she handed me a copy of everything in a fresh folder. Manila. Clean. Like the one now sitting in the middle of their table. I'm not giving it to them, I said. She smiled. You don't need to. When I got home, I sat on my couch, poured a cup of coffee, and looked out the window at the early November sky. It was cloudy, but calm. I had never felt so weightless. They had taken so much, but I had given it. Now I was taking something back. Not with anger, not with noise, but with documents, dates, boundaries. I was no longer waiting for them to treat me like family. I had already filed the paperwork to remove myself from theirs. And in that silence, something strange and sacred settled into my chest. Kellen told me it was a business trip. He had called on a Thursday morning, voice tight and harried, asking if I could float him a short-term loan just enough to cover flights and hotel while he pitched to new investors at a weekend wellness conference in Tampa. He promised to pay me back within 2 weeks. I didn't ask questions. I wired the money before noon. That was 6 months ago. The repayment never came. Neither did the follow-up call. But I remembered the charge. It showed up on my statement, a 3-night stay at the Bellamy Resort and Spa. 5 stars, full-board luxury wellness amenities. It had stuck in my mind mostly because of how polished he sounded when he explained it. How rehearsed. Kellen only ever sounded that smooth when he was selling something. So 2 weeks ago, with Corinne's help, I called the hotel. I said I was checking a charge on my own card. The woman on the phone was helpful, almost cheerful. Yes, ma'am. I can read you the folio. Room charges, meals, 2 massages, a wine pairing dinner for 2, and then guests listed as Kellen R. and Lana F. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. Lana. It wasn't a name I recognized, but I didn't need to. Kellen had said he traveled alone. There was no assistant, no investor, no team, just him and Lana. When I hung up, I printed the statement. I added it to the folder, and I stopped wondering if he was lying. Back at the table, Kellen had reached that final page. His eyes scanned the header, the list of charges. Then he froze. He didn't ask who Lana was. He didn't look confused. He looked like a man who realized too late that the safety net was gone. Melise leaned in. "What is it?" He didn't speak. His jaw clenched. Evie leaned back, watching both of them now, something shifting behind her young eyes. "It's a receipt," I said quietly. "From the Bellamy Resort." Melise blinked. "In Tampa," I nodded. The one he said was a solo trip. Just business. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. Kellen looked up at me, then not angry, not even ashamed, just exposed. He reached for his wine glass, but his hand stopped halfway. "I think we're done here," he muttered. "No," I said, rising to my feet. "Now, we're done." And I turned toward the front door. I remember the winter I pawned my wedding ring. Kellen was 23, full of plans and charm, always talking about independence and how he was going to build something that mattered. He came to me that week with a business proposal and shaky hands, saying the bank needed a little more collateral, just enough to get the lease signed. He said it fast, almost too fast, as if speed would hide the desperation in his voice. I didn't ask what happened to his savings. I didn't ask why Melise's parents weren't helping. I didn't even ask if the idea was solid. I just nodded. The next day, I walked into a little pawn shop 2 blocks from my apartment. I hadn't been in there since the furnace broke years earlier. The man behind the counter didn't even ask why I was there. He just looked at the ring and said, "Sentimental," I said, "all jewelry is." It wasn't worth much. Thin gold. A modest stone. But it was mine. My husband had saved 3 months for it while working graveyard shifts at the printing plant. He gave it to me in a cardboard box on our porch. I'd worn it through every move, every job, every lonely night after he died. I gave it up in 30 seconds. Kellen never asked how I got the money. He just hugged me tight, fleeting, and said, "You always come through, Mom." That was the phrase he used when he needed something. "You always come through." As if that was my role, my function, my programming. I worked 3 jobs the first year he started that business. One of them was overnight custodial at the library, where my feet swelled so badly I had to buy new shoes just to get through the shifts. I told myself it was worth it, that it was what mothers did. I didn't take vacations, didn't buy new clothes. I packed dinners of boiled rice and frozen peas just to make payments stretch. When the business finally made a profit, I celebrated alone with a can of soup in front of the television. He never looked back. Never said, "How did you afford that?" Never said, "Did it cost you something?" Just kept going, handing me receipts for life. Groceries, bills, emergencies like they were IOUs I had signed before he could write. Even as a child, Kellen had been stubborn, proud. But underneath that was a boy who used to fall asleep with his hand in mine, who cried when he broke the neighbor's window and asked me if we'd have to move. I missed that boy. I mourned him for years. But he was gone, replaced by the man sitting at the Thanksgiving table gripping a wine glass with a stranger's name on his hotel bill. I carried him through 100 storms, held him steady when he didn't know what a steady life was. And somehow, he still looked at me like I was excess, like I was something to trim from the picture. I paused at the door before leaving, letting my hand rest briefly on the frame. I had raised a child. He had grown into someone else. It was just after Kellen's high school graduation when Warren first said it. We were standing in the kitchen, a pot of overcooked spaghetti between us, while Kellen laughed with his friends in the backyard. Warren was wiping down the counter, moving slower than usual. He'd been tired a lot that year, slipping behind on sleep, on words on health. I'd chalked it up to stress. But that night, He looked at me with something heavier in his eyes. "He loves you," he said, "but he doesn't see you." I laughed. "He's 18. None of them do at that age." Warren nodded, but not in agreement. "More like resignation. If they don't see your value now," he said, placing the rag on the counter, "they'll never see it when you leave." I brushed it off. I told myself it was just the fatigue talking, that he was overthinking, that he'd feel better once he had time to rest. But even then, the words stuck. They came back to me the day I drove home from the Thanksgiving that wasn't. The sky was bruised with late afternoon clouds, and the roads were quiet, too quiet. I kept thinking about Warren, how he'd stand behind me at gatherings with one hand on my shoulder, always grounding me, always seeing what I refused to say aloud. I used to think he was too harsh when it came to Kellen. He's not ungrateful, I'd insist. He's just overwhelmed. He's trying. But Warren never budged. Trying doesn't excuse forgetting who held you up. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. Because Kellen hadn't just forgotten who held him up, he'd convinced himself I had never carried him at all. That I was just a shadow, trailing behind, silent and optional. The thought made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. In his last year, Warren started writing more. Short notes, phrases he'd jot down on index cards and leave around the house. Little truths he didn't want to say out loud. I found one, weeks after he passed, tucked inside his sock drawer. It said, "When you give everything, they'll forget you had anything to give." I folded it and put it in my wallet. It's still there. The older I get, the more I realize he was never warning me out of fear. He was preparing me for the inevitable, for this. For the moment a son could sit across from me, raise a glass and declare that I didn't belong anymore. Warren always believed I'd outgrow the illusion before they outgrew me. And now I had. I pulled into my driveway, a quiet little rental, 3 towns over that no one ever asked to visit. The porch light flickered when I stepped up, but I didn't mind. I unlocked the door, walked in and breathed. The house smelled like coffee and old books, my kind of silence. And for the first time in years, I didn't have to check my phone to see who needed something from me. I knew the answer. No one. And somehow that felt more like peace than loneliness ever had. It was near the end of the evening, before the vote, before the folder, before Kellen's words hardened the room into something I could never walk back into again. I was in the kitchen, scraping plates into the trash, my hands aching from holding so much silence. The clatter of cutlery was louder than the conversation in the next room. Melise was going on about centerpiece arrangements. Calton was bragging about some app update he barely understood. Kellen's voice rose and fell, like a wave I no longer tried to follow. That's when I felt a small tug on the hem of my cardigan. I turned and saw Evie, my granddaughter, my small piece of light in a house that had gone cold. She looked up at me, solemn-eyed, her hands hidden behind her back. "Hi, pumpkin," I whispered, brushing a crumb from her cheek. She glanced around quickly, then held out a folded napkin. "Don't open it here." I didn't. I tucked it into my apron pocket like it was something fragile, like it might vanish if anyone else saw it. Later that night in my car, after the door had closed behind me for the last time, I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before remembering it. The napkin was still warm from my hands when I unfolded it, written in pink gel pen in small, uneven letters. "You're my favorite person. Don't let them be mean." There was a tiny heart next to my name, spelled wrong, Merelda. My eyes stung so suddenly, so deeply, I had to press my forehead against the steering wheel just to breathe. They hadn't taken her from me completely, not yet. But they would try. Melise had already started using words like confusing boundaries. She once told me Evie needed space to bond with her nuclear family. Kellen parroted those phrases like he'd rehearsed them, pretending they weren't cutting out the only person who ever showed up to Evie's school plays when her parents were busy closing deals. That note, those 7 little words, were more honest than anything else said at that table. and it terrified me. Because I knew what was coming. Restrictive holidays. We're just doing something small this year. Missed phone calls. No reply to birthday cards. I had lived it before with Kellen when he started building his adult life like a wall with no door. And now, Evie was inside those walls. I couldn't scale them, but I could leave something behind. The next day, I took her note, folded it neatly, and slid it behind the plastic sleeve of my wallet right next to Warren's index card. 2 truths pressed together. One from the man who saw my worth when no one else did, and one from the child who still did, even if no one wanted her to. I didn't know when I'd see her again. Didn't know if she'd even be allowed to write again, but I knew she remembered. I knew she knew, and that meant something was still intact, even if it had to live in secret. I packed the folder in the early morning. The light hadn't yet broken across the kitchen windows, and the whole world felt suspended like it knew what I was about to do. Every page was already in order. College tuition receipts, bank transfers, the loan papers Kellen begged me to co-sign, the spa bill from Melissa's emergency wellness retreat, and that last one, the hotel folio from Tampa, with Lana's name on it, printed clean in black ink that didn't lie. I tucked them into the folder slowly, each sheet sliding in like a chapter closing. Then I added one more thing. A letter. Not for Kellen. Not for Melisse. It was for Evie. I wrote it the night before, sitting cross-legged on my bed, with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The words came slowly at first, like I didn't trust myself to speak plainly. But then the dam gave way. I told her the things no one else would. How I used to hum to her when she was a baby, and her parents were too tired to rock her to sleep. How she used to laugh when I made hand puppets out of napkins. How proud I was when she wrote her name for the first time backwards, E and all. I told her that I loved her in a way that didn't ask anything back, and that even if she didn't understand now someday, she might read the letter and know what really happened. I didn't use words like betrayal or exile or cruelty. I kept it simple. Love. Truth. Protection. I sealed the envelope and wrote her name on it in black ink, Evie Lynn Harrow. Then I tucked it into the back of the folder just behind the financials. It wasn't revenge. It was memory. Preserved. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and let it sit beside me while I got dressed. Dark slacks, a sweater, nothing fancy. Just clean, quiet clothes. Clothes that didn't ask for attention but couldn't be ignored either. I picked up the folder, felt its weight. Not just paper. History, boundaries, freedom. The drive to their house felt longer than usual, even though I knew the streets by heart. I didn't play music. I didn't turn on the radio. I let the silence stretch. Let it remind me that I wasn't walking into a war. I was walking out. The coffee cooled beside me in the cup holder. I didn't touch it. My fingers gripped the steering wheel like they used to grip Kellen's stroller handle back when he still needed me, when he looked up and smiled like I hung the moon. That boy was long gone. But I was still here. Still driving. Still steady. I pulled into their cul-de-sac just after noon, and I sat there a moment, letting the engine tick in the quiet. The folder rested on the passenger seat, the letter inside pressed close against the fax. I reached over and laid my hand on it. Not for strength, just recognition. This was the last time I'd be invited into that house, but I wasn't going in for an invitation. I was going in for the truth. Kellen grabbed the folder with a flourish, like he was about to prove something. Maybe he thought it was a bluff. Maybe he thought it was empty. But the moment he opened it, I saw his posture change. His smirk dropped. He flipped past the first page bank transfers, his eyes scanning quickly. Then the second tuition receipts in my name, with his listed as beneficiary. By the time he reached the third, the hotel folio. Melisse leaned over to get a look. Her manicured finger traced the line item that read, "Spa package, 2 guests." And then she froze. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice tight. Kellen turned to the spreadsheet stapled to the next page. His jaw clenched. Each line was dated itemized. Business bailouts, emergency repairs, groceries, down payments, car notes. At the bottom, bold and red total, $131,774.92. He looked up at me, something wild flickering behind his eyes. "What the hell is this?" My voice didn't shake. "It's the tally of what every time you needed me." He scoffed, but it wasn't confident. It sounded like air trying to cover panic. "You kept records," he said, as if that was the betrayal. "You erased them," I said. "I just wrote them back down." Melise reached for the hotel bill again. "Who's Lana?" Kellen didn't answer. His face had gone still. She held it up, tapping the name. "This retreat you said was solo. This charge was on her card. 2 guests. And I'm not Lana?" There was a split second when the room felt like it cracked. Melise pulled away from him the way you'd flinch from something hot. I stayed seated, calm, not triumphant. Just resolved. "You lied to me," Melise hissed. "You told me that trip was for stress relief," it was Kellen said. But even he didn't believe it. Calton across the table suddenly found his interest in the centerpiece. No more clapping, no more smug glances. The room had changed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand. I just let the facts sit there. I reached out and flipped the page. The next document was the screenshot, Melise's message, the one she unsent. She saw it, and her breath hitched. "Just smile, she's a spineless wallet." Kellen turned to her now. What she said, defensive. It was a joke. "You know, He didn't speak. He looked down. I could feel the power shift. Not because I won, but because I stopped giving everything away. I looked at them both, finally letting the silence hang. And then I spoke, clear and plain. "You voted me out, so I took back what was mine." No one said anything for a long time. Then Kellen stood still, holding the folder like it burned in his hands. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No apology, no denial, just absence. He walked out of the room without a word. Melise followed a second later, her heels sharp against the tile. Calton rose, quietly mumbled something about needing air, and disappeared too. Only Evie remained sitting at the far end of the table with her hands folded in her lap, watching me with wide, unblinking eyes. I met her gaze and smiled, small and real. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look away. Not this time. I stood, tucked my chair in, and reached for my coat. No one tried to stop me. I hadn't made it to the door when the storm behind me broke. "You told me it was a solo trip." Melise's voice snapped through the dining room like a whip. I turned back slowly, one hand resting on the frame of the archway. Kellen had turned red in the face, but not from guilt. From being exposed. Melise shoved the hotel printout at his chest. "You used her money, Kellen. You swore to me, swore that you were alone. You even brought back the damn sea salt scrub like it was proof he tried to bat the paper away. You think I invited her. It was a business contact." It wasn't. Lana is not a business contact. Melise spat. "She liked your beach photos 3 minutes after you posted them. From a private account." I checked. Calton stepped forward, hands raised like a substitute teacher trying to break up a playground fight. "Everyone just take a breath. This is getting stay out of it, Calton," I said softly but firmly. He looked surprised, like no one had told him he was allowed to be dismissed. Melise's voice was rising now, the pitch unraveling. "You made me stand there and clap when you humiliated your own mother. And for what? So you could cheat on me with someone named Lana while living off the woman you just kicked out of your life? It's not like that," Kellen said. "She's been manipulating us for years, making us feel guilty." Oh, please, Melise snapped. You were happy to cash the checks. Kellen opened his mouth again, but I stepped forward, past the half-empty wine glasses and stained napkins, and spoke over them both. Enough. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Melise turned eyes wide. Kelton backed toward the wall. Kellen froze. I didn't come here for an apology, I said. I didn't come here to fix you, or beg for space at a table I built. They said nothing. For once, not a single excuse between them. You talk about manipulation, I continued. But the truth is, none of you ever thought to ask what I needed. Not once. Not when I was wiring money to cover your credit cards. Not when I was driving across town to pick up Evie because you had a thing. Not when I emptied the last of Warren's life insurance so your lights wouldn't get shut off. I looked at Kellen now. You didn't lose a provider today. You lost the last person who still saw something worth saving in you. The silence that followed was thick with recognition, too raw to deny, too late to fix. I turned back toward the door. Evie was still there, her small frame tucked behind the staircase, peeking just slightly into the room. I paused, reached into my purse, pulled out a smaller envelope, one that wasn't in the folder. I walked it over and knelt to her level. No performance, no lecture, just presence. This is for you, I said, gently placing it in her hands. Open it when you're ready. She nodded, her eyes bright but dry. Then I stood, walked past the adults frozen in their own shame, and opened the door to leave. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't need to. The silence in that house would close louder than any sound I could make. I stepped onto the porch and took a breath, steady, cold, honest air. The kind that reminded me I was still here, still whole, despite everything they had tried to carve out of me. Behind me, I heard light footsteps. Evie. She burst through the door before anyone else could stop, her eyes wet, breath quick. Mimi. I turned just in time to catch her. She flung her arms around my waist, clutching me like a lifeline. My hands moved instinctively to her back. I hadn't cried yet, not when Kellen humiliated me, not when Melise mocked me, not even when I laid the folder down like a burial, but now, holding the only good thing that ever came from that house, I felt the crack form. Mimi, don't go, she said, voice muffled in my coat. I crouched down, taking both her small hands in mine. Her palms were cold, but her grip was strong. She was trembling, but her eyes met mine without flinching. I leaned closer, my voice low, meant only for her. I'm not leaving you, sweetheart, I whispered. I'm just removing myself from what hurts. She blinked at me, confused. I don't understand, she said softly. You will, I told her. Not today. But one day you'll know this wasn't about quitting. It was about choosing peace. From inside, I heard Kellen's voice sharper now. Melise calling Evie's name like it had weight after everything she said. But Evie didn't move. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small bracelet I'd tucked inside earlier, a thin silver chain with a charm shaped like a book. Her favorite. Keep this close, I said. Whenever you wear it, remember who you are. She nodded again, lip trembling. And then, with a quiet, brave breath, she let me go. I stood slowly, her small fingers slipping from mine like petals on water. I turned back toward the door. Kellen had stepped out now, eyes narrowed but saying nothing. Melise hovered behind him, arms crossed like a shield she couldn't hold up anymore. I've removed myself from everything, I said, voice calm, steady, final. Financially, legally, personally. Kelton stood behind them, both blinking, like the lights had just come on for the first time in years. You'll get no more from me, I added. No more covering, no more cleaning up, no more pretending we're anything but what you made us. Kellen opened his mouth, but stopped. He must have known. There were no more cards to play. I stepped down the porch, and when my foot touched the grass, something lifted. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd carried for years. Evie was still at the top step, holding the bracelet in both hands. She didn't cry again. She just watched me walk, watched me reach the car, watched me drive off into the late afternoon without once turning around. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew something simple and solid: I was done. And still, somehow, part of me was free. They didn't call that night, or the next. But by the third day, the parade began. The voicemails hit my phone in waves, each one worse than the last. Kellen was first. "You think you're the only one who's been hurt? You think this makes you strong? You blindsided us at Thanksgiving, Merelda. I hope it was worth it." Click, then Melise. Her voice brittle and broken, like cracked porcelain. "I didn't mean what I said. I was stressed. I didn't know you were keeping all that. We just wanted a peaceful holiday. Can't we talk?" Click. Then Calton trying to patch the shattered walls with duct tape made of charm. "Hey, Merelda. I don't know what happened, but it's not like we voted or anything. That was just Kellen being dramatic. You know how he is. Maybe we can meet up coffee." Click. But the last one wasn't sharp or selfish. It was soft. "Hi, Mimi. It's me." Evie's voice. "I know you're probably busy, or resting, or mad, but I just wanted to say thank you for being there, for always being there. I still have the bracelet. I keep it in my backpack. I'm going to wear it when I go to art club next week." There was a pause. "Also, I miss you." Click. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time staring at the phone in my hand. The screen still glowed faintly from the message, casting a soft light across the dark comforter. I didn't call back. I didn't delete it either. I let the phone slip from my fingers onto the blanket and leaned back against the pillows, letting the silence stretch out. Because silence was mine now. Not the kind they used to punish me. The kind I chose. The kind I earned. They wanted me quiet when I had truth to tell. Now that I was finally quiet, they couldn't bear it. I didn't need to scream or curse or demand anything. My absence spoke louder than my presence ever did. And I wasn't coming back. Not to fix what they broke. Not to smooth over what they denied. Not even to accept the apologies they were only offering now that they'd lost control of me. Guilt, I'd learned, is only useful when it comes early. When it's paired with humility. When it's real. This guilt, it was too late. Too loud. Too hollow. So I let it knock at my door. And I didn't answer. 6 months. That's how long it's been since the dinner that turned everything inside out. Some mornings it still sneaks up on me how quiet life has become. Not the cold kind of quiet. Not the silence of being shut out, ignored, erased. This is different. It's the hush of peace. Of being able to breathe all the way to the bottom of your lungs without waiting for someone to ask for something in return. This morning, like most Fridays now, I woke early. Not out of obligation. Not because someone needed a ride or a wire transfer or a casserole for a dinner party I wasn't invited to. I woke because I wanted to. Because I like the way the light spills through the small window above the sink in my new apartment. Because I like the way my feet hit the hardwood as I pad toward the coffee pot. No slippers, no makeup, no pretense. I poured the coffee slowly, let the aroma settle into the air. Reached for the mug that always makes me smile, not because of what it says, but because of what it doesn't. It's plain white. On the side in neat black letters, just one word: Merelda. Not world's best mom, not queen of the kitchen, not a gift from anyone trying to make up for guilt or neglect. Just my name. That's all I need now. I sat by the small round table in the corner of my living room. A modest space with a bookshelf filled with titles I actually love, a patchwork chair I found at a thrift store, and a plant I've somehow managed to keep alive. It isn't grand. It isn't what Kellen used to call Instagram worthy, but it's mine. Fridays used to be frantic running errands, watching Evie, while her parents took time for themselves, cleaning up the messes no one acknowledged. I used to ache for the quiet. Now Fridays are mine. There's no knocking at the door, no passive-aggressive texts, no guilt-laced phone calls. Just a standing lunch with Nora and Louise, two women from the neighborhood who taught me that friendship at 70 isn't only possible, it's richer than most things that came before. We meet at the cafe down the block. They bring puzzles and stories, and most of all, no expectations. They don't need me to fill a role. They don't ask for proof of my usefulness. They just pour coffee laugh too loudly and ask me how I actually feel. And I tell them, not everything. Not all at once, but enough. I've learned something in these 6 months. Family isn't defined by blood or legal names or who claims a seat at the holiday table. Family is who listens when you speak and still shows up when you don't. It's who respects the space you carve for yourself. It's who doesn't vote on your worth. Evie still sends letters sometimes. Tiny folded notes in bright envelopes. Drawings. A pressed daisy once. I haven't seen her in person since that day, but I keep every envelope in a box under my bed. Her handwriting is getting stronger. So am I. I took another sip from the mug, let the warmth hold steady in my chest. Outside, the sidewalk glistened faintly from an early rain. People passed by with dogs, with strollers, with groceries. Lives in motion. And mine, finally, was one of them. The mailbox is old, a little rust along the edges, but it works fine. I chose it myself from the hardware store down the road. Not too modern, not too polished. Just functional. Simple. On the front in clean black print, it says, Merelda Vexlin. Not Mrs. Vexlin. Not Grandma. Not Mom. Just Merelda. It was the first time in years that I'd written my full name without attaching it to someone else. No titles, no roles, no explaining. Just me. That morning, I stepped outside like I always do. Coffee in one hand, keys in the other, and opened the small metal door. Flyers, a bank statement, and one white envelope with soft blue ink. The handwriting was unmistakable. Evie. I didn't open it right away. I tucked it gently beneath my arm, went back inside, and placed it on the table beside the window. The same spot where the sun hits strongest around 9 a.m., warming the wood and making the steam rise from my mug just a little longer. I waited until the light found it. Only then did I sit down, slide my finger under the flap, and unfold the page. There were 3 sentences. Hi, Mimi. I drew this in class. It's you and me at the zoo again. I made your hair purple this time because purple is brave. I love you. Evie tucked behind the note was the drawing. Crayon on construction paper slightly crumpled a bent corner. We stood by a giraffe. I was taller in her version. She had given me a big smile and long legs and, yes, purple hair. I laughed, not loud, just enough to feel something open inside me. There were no apologies in the note, no updates about the others, no questions about why I hadn't written back. Just love. Undemanding, unattached. I traced the drawing with one finger, let my eyes follow the lines of her handwriting, so careful, so proud. Purple is brave. I stood and pinned the picture to the corkboard above my desk, next to the small map where I'd been marking places I might want to visit. There's a coastal town I've been thinking about. I hear it's quiet and kind. I don't know what Evie will become as she grows up. But I know what I want her to remember. That her Mimi found her name again. That she stopped waiting for permission to matter. That she built something out of nothing and lived inside it fully. I took a deep breath and looked around my space. My books. My blanket draped over the arm of the chair. The quiet hum of the radiator. The stillness I used to dread now a soft companion. And on the front door below the peephole, a new plaque I'd ordered last week. It reads, Merelda lives here. And that's enough.